console application, right? That's your list all method. We've created a connection, and then we've created our command.
Cool.
All right. So now we have to go tell the command, hey, go get me some tabular data. Okay. So let's go back to Visual Studio. The first thing that we need to do is we need to tell the command what type of command it is. So we're going to type in cmd dot, and this is going to be command type. So select the command type, the third one. Yep. Equals. And so now this one, remember the whole day of week thing that we did with enumerations where we assigned a number to a string? And we said Sundays 1, Mondays 2, so on and so forth. Well, these command types is an enumeration. So we have the same thing. So Visual Studio helps you. If you hit space right now, it says, oh yeah, you want SQL data command type. So go ahead and tab and then press dot again. And this is going to be the types of commands that are available. And we want to execute a stored procedure. So just press tab again and then semicolon. Now, we could get rid of system.data and just have command type. So go ahead and get rid of system.data. But the problem is that it doesn't recognize it. So let's go show potential fixes. You need to bring in the namespace, and you'll see it once you click on that first one. Click on the first one. You see how I added it to the top. So that's where the namespace, that's where the command type exists. So all we're saying, hey, go use this namespace, and now I can go and shorten that line up. So it's not as verbose, you know what I mean? There's not so much in your line of code. All right, so now that we've told it, this is a stored procedure that you're gonna execute. We're gonna go ahead and create a new line. And we're gonna need it to give us back tabular data. So we're gonna execute a reader. So you're gonna say, oh, well, first, before we even execute that reader, we need to open the connection. So this is where we open the connection. Remember how we did that?
Open? No.
What object needs to open the connection?
Yeah.
There you go, connection, that dot open. There you go. Then we need to open close parenthesis and then terminate that with the semicolon. So remember on line 17, your variable con, C-O-N-N, is a type SQL connection. So that's your object. C-O-N-N is your object.
Okay.
And so what we did is SQL connection is the blueprint that .NET takes to build in memory. And we're just referencing with the variable name, C-O-N-N. And so we call the new connection string or SQL connection with the connection string. It takes that blueprint and it builds that object in memory. So now we just reference it with C-O-N-N. And so the command open in that object opens up a connection to SQL Server and it grabs all the data. So now that we have that connection open, we have to tell the command, it's like, hey, command, CMD actually, because remember the name of your variable of the SQL command is CMD dot execute reader. That's it right there. Open close parenthesis, because we're calling a method. Now that execute reader, if you hover over it, it's going to return a SQL reader, a SQL data reader. So just like we created the SQL command, CMD equals new SQL command, we have to create a SQL data reader. So right before line 23, right before command, go ahead and space, equal space. Go ahead and just put an equal sign. Okay. And go in front of the equal. In here, we're gonna receive a type. We're gonna receive something from the command reader. And that is going to be a SQL data reader. So type in SQL data reader. Yep, that's the second one. And then we're going to give it a name. So that's the type. Now we got to give it a name, and we just call it reader. Yep. So, okay. So you see how the reader is the name of your variable, and we have to tell C# what type that reader is. And we're telling it that reader represents a SQL data reader.
Okay.
And we're getting that from the command.execute reader. The command.execute reader is going to go and execute the store procedure, and it's going to return to you a reader. And that reader, think of it in your mind as an Excel sheet.
Okay.
That's essentially, that's what it is. Let's go over to SQL Server and let's execute that birthday select all. Open up a new query. Execute if you're going to spell it out, but exec should do it. Yeah. Birthday select all. And just go ahead and execute that. Go ahead and so you see how this is represented as a table, and it gives you the rows, right? Rows 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the IDs 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then the columns are ID, full name, date of birth, date of death, notoriety, created at, updated at. So as you're grabbing that data, it's going to say, hey, I got the first row ready for you to read. You're going to say, okay, give me the ID. Okay, give me the full name. Okay, give me the date of birth. Okay, give me the DOD. Give me the notoriety. Great, give me the created, updated, all that stuff. And then you're going to say, okay, read the next one. And when it reads the next one, you say, okay, give me the ID, give me the full name, give me the, so on and so forth. And it does that until there's no more records. As soon as there's no more records, it's going to say, hey, I'm done. You don't have to request anymore. And at that point, you close the connection. And you're done with the connection, and you display the content on the screen. Let's go back to Visual Studio. This is what we're picturing, okay? So after line 23, start a new one, start a new line. And we're going to say while. We're going to use the while command. So go ahead and tab again. We're going to say reader.read. And reader.read, open close parenthesis, because it's a method that we're calling. You got to close your parenthesis because there you go. Press enter. I'll get rid of that empty line. Yep. Inside that bracket. Okay, so now what reader.read did is it grabbed that first record. And it says, because the while, it just sits there in a loop, right? As long as the reader.read returns true, it's going to continue to read. And so that first time it said, you say, hey, go read the next record. And so it reads the first record the first time. And we're going to say, we're going to grab the information. We're going to grab the information based on the name of the columns. So the first column is ID column, right? And what type is that?
An integer.
An integer. So we're going to create an integer. So go ahead and int. And we're going to call it lowercase ID. I'm sorry, it's just ID, but lowercase. Sorry. And it's going to be equal to reader dot get int32. And then open parenthesis. And you see how it has more than one signature? Go click on that down arrow. You see how you can do a string name as well? So you can give it the name of the column. So inside of double quotes, you're gonna have to type it in exactly how it is on the table. And I think it's capital I, lowercase d. Let's go check with SQL Server to make sure that that's the case.
Yeah.
Yep, lowercase I. So the way it's spelled right here is how you have to read it here. So go ahead and close that off with a semicolon. And we're going to do the same thing with the other field. So we need to remember what each field type is. Okay. So what's the next one? It's what is it, full name?
Full name.
So what type is that? That's a string type, right? It's a string of characters.
Mm-hmm. String.
So lowercase full name.
Full name. Equals.
Get string.
Oops. Cool. The next one is date of birth.
Don't forget to finish off with the semicolon. Yep.
Date
So
of birth.
now date of birth is what?
Integer.
Date of birth?
Wait. Date of birth is a date.
It's a date. In C#, there's no such thing as a date. There's only a date time.
Okay.
And you could just do all lowercase DOB. Yeah, there you go. So reader dot get date.
Date time.
Get date time. Yep.
This one is DOB. And then date of death.
So here's a tricky one, okay? Because date of death could potentially be null, and that can give you a problem, okay? So we actually have to do an if statement here.
Oh. In the beginning?
Yeah, go ahead and get rid of the date time, all that, get rid of that. We got to do an if statement.
Oh.
So if, and then go ahead and press tab. Okay, so if reader dot is DB null, and I believe it's an open close parenthesis. I mean, open close, yeah, parenthesis. Yeah. Okay. Now, if it's a null, we don't want to do anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's not a null, so in order to reverse is DB null from a true or false, you have to put a exclamation point in the beginning of reader. Before reader, you put an exclamation. So that reverses it. So if it's a null, we don't want to do anything with it. So is null true? And then you say reverse that, it's a false.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in here, we need to create a in between 28 and 29. Wait a second. What's going on with this DB null? Why is that line red? Oh, so yeah, we have to give it the the column. Just like we did get string, get date time, we give it the name of the column. We have to do the same with is DB null. There we go. Okay, so in between 28 and 29, we have to establish our variable. So go ahead and say date time, DOD. And the problem is that date time cannot be a null value. You're like, oh man, we're just throwing one thing after another in front of this thing. So what we need to do is we need to make it a nullable type. Now that we have all the records, okay, let's go ahead. We got all the values from that record. Now let's go and console write it. So what we could do is you have to stay inside that the while loop, but let's go ahead and press enter twice. And in here, we're going to do console write line, and we're going to use string interpolation. In here, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put, so let's go ahead and put it inside of the curly braces. Now, DOD is an interesting one, right? Because that could be, no, let's go ahead and run with that, see what we get. You also need notoriety in there. Okay, so you see how DOD has a little squiggly mark?
Yeah.
We need to, on line 29, we need to say DOD is equal to null. And then it's going to sit there. And for every record, it's going to do the same thing. So we have 5 records in there, right? So it's going to say while reader equals while reader.read grabs the first record. And then you go and say, okay, give me the ID, give me the full name, give me the date of birth. If the date of death is not empty or null, they go ahead and give me that. Give me the notoriety, give me the created at, give me the updated at. And then you're going to console write it. And then it goes back up to the top of the loop. And it says reader.read grabs the second record. And we do the same thing. And it goes back up to the while loop, runs the reader.read, grabs the third record, so on and so forth, until it reaches the end. And then reader.read returns a false. It says, I have no more records. It exits out of the loop. So as soon as it exits out of the loop, we want to close that connection. There you go. Let's run it, see what it does.
Whoa.
What does it say?
Full name. Out of range exception.
How do you spell full name? Go look at SQL. How does it spell?
Oh, 1 L. All right.
A victim of your own misspelling again.
There we go.
Look at that.
They're all there.
They're all there.